More and more Arab Israelis are voting for Netanyahu and his Likud party. Unbelievable. Back in January, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the Israeli Arab vote had tremendous potential for his center-right party, the Likud. Netanyahu said at the time he had hoped to make significant inroads among Arab Israeli voters, a demographic traditionally not seen as favorably disposed towards the Likud party or Netanyahu as a leader. Here is one Arab municipality where the Likud party received 24% of the vote. Here is another one with 11% of the vote. Netanyahu and the Likud got votes in many, if not all, of the Arab municipalities across Israel. To most people around the world, this most probably sounds very surprising. Why would Arabs vote for the center-right Likud party for Netanyahu to be prime minister? Around the world, the media portrays Netanyahu and the right wing as anti-Arab. So why would Israeli Arabs vote for Netanyahu and the Likud, basically for a right-wing nationalist religious government? Now, the truth is it's actually pretty simple. More and more Israeli Arabs realize that Netanyahu, the Likud, and right-wing nationalistic government is actually good for them. First of all, life is good for them in Israel. While they see their fellow Arab Muslims suffering across countries throughout the Middle East, here in Israel, Arab Israelis are thriving with freedom and equality, yes, even under Netanyahu and his right-wing governments. On top of that, they saw firsthand that it was Netanyahu and his right-wing government that signed 4 peace deals with Arab Muslim countries, normalizing relations with them. As Netanyahu said himself at an event before the elections, quote, "I've produced 4 peace deals with Arab countries, and now you see Jews and Arabs hugging in Dubai. Why can't that happen here in Israel?" End quote. Right? That was Prime Minister Netanyahu at an election event in Al-Fahim, an Arab city. And more Arab Israelis agree. The Israeli media has reported that support for Netanyahu's Likud party multiplied in Arab communities with vote numbers often 4, 5, and even 8 times higher than during the last election in 2020. For anyone who relies on establishment media, this makes no sense at all, because they make Netanyahu and the right-wing parties in Israel as anti-Arab. No Israeli Arabs should want to vote for right-wing nationalistic parties like the Likud with an anti-Arab leader like Bibi Netanyahu, who would then establish a right-wing government. But Israeli Arabs know better than the establishment media. They know the truth because they live here. Just to understand the seismic shift taking place in Israel with our Arab citizens, I want to take you back a few years. Back in the 2015 election, then Prime Minister Netanyahu famously warned on election day that the Arabs were voting in droves, as the media reported it. The Israeli and world media attacked Netanyahu for being racist with this comment. How could he focus the Arabs are coming out in droves? However, Netanyahu didn't say that because he was racist. He was highlighting the illegal act of then-President Obama, who tacitly supported and funded a huge get-out-to-vote for Arab Israelis in Israel to vote in trying to overthrow Netanyahu. And even with this massive effort, Netanyahu still won that election. That's what he was referring to. Netanyahu's Likud party has also previously warned about voter fraud in the Arab sector in previous elections. Again, there are still plenty of Arab Israelis who hate Netanyahu and are against the right-wing nationalistic parties like Likud. However, with each year and with each election, more and more Arab Israelis are becoming proud Israelis and even voting for Netanyahu and his Likud party because they see that Netanyahu and the right wing are good for Arabs as well. They're not bad for Arabs. They don't hate Arabs. Another important point to understand is that the Arab Israeli public is mostly a traditional religious public. In that sense, they have more in common with the right-wing nationalist religious camp than they have with the left. While many of the politicians on the left push for anti-traditional and anti-religious legislation, it is the right-wing religious parties that stand up against those legislative efforts to protect family and religious values. So, as the Jewish politicians and parties on the Israeli left push their anti-family, anti-religious agenda, Arab Muslim Israelis find that the right-wing religious politicians and parties are their partners on the traditional religious front in the legislative efforts. Bottom line, don't believe the media. Israel is an amazing place for Arab Israelis and for all minorities, and that is even beginning to be seen in our elections, with more Arab Muslim Israelis voting for even Netanyahu and his center-right party, the Likud. As I always say, Arab Muslim Israelis are the most blessed Arab Muslims in the Middle East, with freedom, equality, and the opportunity to succeed like in no other Muslim country in the Middle East, regardless of their own religious perspective, identity, sect, etc., etc., etc. Israel is a blessing to all who live in it, including all Arab Muslims.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.